Look at those boots, Walker. Did you borrow them from Goodwill, or did your daddy hand them down after the grave? The words cut through the barracks like a razor. Everyone froze, half-dressed, boots lined at the edge of their bunks for inspection. The drill sergeant's voice wasn't just loud. It was cruel, calculated, designed to strip a man bare in front of his brothers. Laughter broke out, the kind that stings worse than a punch. Ethan Walker just stood there, hands stiff at his sides, face burning hotter than the Georgia sun. He didn't answer. He didn't dare. The silence after the insult was suffocating, the kind that told you every eye in the room was waiting to see if you'd break. I thought that was the end of it. Just another insult I'd swallow. But humiliation in the Army doesn't end where the words stop. It follows you, echoes in your boots on the concrete, in the way men look at you at chow, in the way they whisper when they think you can't hear. That morning we were lined up for inspection, boots polished, uniforms pressed, bunks squared away so tight you could bounce a quarter off them. I'd worked twice as hard as anyone, but it didn't matter. Sergeant Hayes had already chosen his target. "Private Walker," he barked, walking right past polished boots and squared away bunks. "Looks like poverty doesn't just smell, it shines. Everyone take a look at private welfare here. This is what happens when charity cases slip through recruiting." The barracks erupted. Some laughed to stay out of Hayes' line of fire. Others smirked because it was easier than standing silent. Ethan said nothing. He stared ahead, jaw clenched, remembering his father's voice from long ago. "Stand tall, son. Don't give them the satisfaction." But inside, he felt the weight of every snicker pressing down on him. Later in the chow hall, the sting came again. He carried his tray, head low, when a body slammed into his shoulder. Food scattered across the floor, mashed potatoes smeared on his boots. Hayes' voice thundered from across the room. "Even in here, Walker's a damn mess. Someone teach this boy how to eat like he belongs in the Army, not a soup kitchen." The laughter came louder this time, echoing off the steel and tile of the mess hall. Ethan bent down, scooping peas and bread from the floor with trembling hands. His face burned, but his eyes stayed cold. Then, something small. Private Ramirez slid his own bread across the table without a word. He didn't laugh. He didn't speak up either. Just one quiet gesture, quick enough not to get noticed by Hayes, but enough that Walker felt it. That tiny act said more than all the noise in the room. It said, "I see you. I know this isn't right." But the injustice didn't stop. Back in the barracks, Hayes kept at it. "You'll never make it, Walker. Army's for men with backbone, not scraps from the factory floor." Hayes didn't know, or maybe he didn't care, that Ethan's father had been a soldier too, one who never came home from his second deployment. Ethan kept that truth locked away in a small box under his bunk, a tarnished medal, the only thing left of his father. No one knew about it, and no one knew that when Ethan's hands shook under pressure, it wasn't weakness. It was rage he'd learned to hide. That night, while others joked and played cards, Ethan sat on his bunk, staring at that medal in his hand. The barracks buzzed with voices and laughter, but he heard none of it. He whispered to himself, "One more day. Just make it through one more day." His father's voice seemed to echo back. "You'll earn your place, not with words, but with grit." The silence around him was heavy. He felt like a ghost in his own platoon, mocked by some, ignored by most, and only barely acknowledged by one. Still, he endured. Because deep down, Ethan knew something they didn't. Humiliation is just another kind of training. It teaches you patience. It teaches you control. And it teaches you to wait for the moment when you finally get to prove who you are. What I never expected was how fast that moment would come, or how it would turn everything upside down. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. Rain hammered down on the training field like a drumline gone mad. The air smelled of wet earth and sweat, and every footfall splashed mud up to our knees. "Move it, Walker! You call that running?" Sergeant Hayes' voice cut through the storm, sharp as a whip. I pushed harder, lungs burning, legs heavy as stone. Every time I fell a step behind, Hayes was there, barking, making sure everyone knew who the weakest link was. The others didn't dare look back. Some laughed under their breath. Others just kept their eyes forward, pretending they didn't hear. I thought I was done when the run ended, but Hayes wasn't finished. "You're still slow, Private Welfare. You want to prove something? Stay after and run it again." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I ran until my chest felt like it might split. Alone in the rain, mud caking my face, I whispered between gasps, "One more. Always one more." My boots sloshed like they weighed 100 pounds, but I didn't stop. Not until I collapsed. Nobody saw. Nobody cared. Except one. From the corner of the barracks, Ramirez watched quietly, towel draped over his shoulder. He didn't say a word, just gave me the smallest nod before heading inside. A nod that said, "I see you." The next day brought rifle range. My hands trembled on the M4, nerves and exhaustion mixing like poison. Hayes circled me like a shark. "Careful, Walker. Don't want you shooting your own foot. Or worse, one of us." Laughter rippled down the line. My first shots were off, grouping sloppy, barely hitting paper. Hayes smirked, loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Factory boy can't even hold a rifle straight. Maybe you should stick to a wrench, Private." I swallowed the insult, bit my tongue until it bled. That evening, long after the range cleared out, I stayed. The sun dropped, bugs swarmed, and I broke down and reassembled that rifle over and over. My hands stopped shaking. Muscle memory set in. By the time the stars blinked on, I could have done it blindfolded. No one saw, but I knew. And that mattered. Chow hall humiliation came next. Trays clattering, voices bouncing off of steel walls, the smell of powdered eggs and coffee thick in the air. Hayes brushed past me, shoulder hard against mine, knocking my tray to the floor. Food splattered across my boots. A few recruits chuckled. "Clumsy welfare kid," Hayes sneered. I bent down, cheeks burning, cleaning scrambled eggs off the floor with napkins while the line kept moving. Then it happened again. That quiet gesture. Ramirez slid half his bread across the table when nobody was looking. No words, just a quick glance. He didn't owe me anything. But in that moment, that bread tasted like dignity. At night, the real punishment began. Hayes found reasons to single me out. "Walker, front and center. Push-ups until I get tired." The floor was cold concrete, my palms raw. "Down, up, down, up." His voice dripped with contempt. My arms screamed, chest on fire. Recruits watched from their bunks, some snickering, some stone-faced, all grateful it wasn't them. Sweat pooled under me, dripping into my eyes. Hayes crouched close, sneering. "You think grit is enough? You'll never make it. Men like you break. Men like you quit." His words pierced deeper than the pain in my muscles. But I kept pushing. "One more," I whispered through clenched teeth. Over and over, until Hayes finally walked away, shaking his head. It was then, flat on the floor, that I realized something. Humiliation was turning into fuel. Every insult, every shove, every laugh, it hardened me. Hayes thought he was breaking me. He didn't know he was forging me. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Lying in my bunk, staring at the ceiling fan spin slow circles, I wondered if he was right. Maybe I didn't belong. Maybe I was just the charity case he said I was. I reached under my bunk, pulled out that small box. Inside lay the tarnished medal my father earned overseas. He never came back. This was all I had left. I rubbed it between my fingers until sleep finally came. Weeks dragged on like this. Run, fail, mocked, shoot, improve, but never praised. Push-ups until collapse, yet no recognition. Hayes never let up. The unit started to believe his words. I saw it in their eyes. Walker's weak, Walker's slow, Walker's dead weight. Except Ramirez. He never laughed. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me in formation, expression unreadable. And though he said little, that silence meant more than 1,000 words. Then came the day that shook me. It was supposed to be a routine drill. Gear checks, formation runs, nothing special. Clouds thickened overhead, thunder rolling. The air felt heavy, electric. Hayes called me out again. "Walker, front of the line. Let's see if charity cases can lead." Snickers broke out. I swallowed hard, palms sweaty, heart hammering. We started running. Mud sucked at our boots, rain turning the trail into a swamp. My legs screamed, lungs clawing for air. Hayes pushed the pace, knowing I'd crack first. And I almost did, until it happened. A recruit slipped in the mud, ankle twisting with a sickening snap. He went down hard, screaming. The line faltered. Recruits hesitated, eyes wide. Hayes barked, "Keep moving. Leave him." The order froze me. Leave him? That wasn't soldiering. That wasn't brotherhood. Without thinking, I doubled back. Mud swallowed my boots as I hauled him up, slung his arm over my shoulders. His weight crushed me, but I moved, step by step. Hayes shouted, voice venomous, "Walker, drop him! You'll kill the whole run!" I ignored it. My world shrank to one thought. Don't let him fall. By the time we stumbled back, I was drenched, gasping, legs shaking, like jelly. The injured recruit clung to me, pale but alive. Silence fell over the group. Hayes's face was red, veins bulging. For once, he didn't have words. Nobody laughed. Ramirez caught my eye and gave the faintest nod, jaw tight. That moment hit harder than any insult. I thought the storm would pass after that. Instead, it left a question hanging in the air. Maybe I wasn't the weak one. Maybe Hayes was wrong. And maybe, just maybe, the moment was coming when everything would change. When the truth would crash down on this unit like thunder. What I never expected was how close that moment really was, or how it would flip the entire world upside down. The morning of the live fire drill felt different. The air was heavier, thicker, as if the whole base knew something was about to go wrong. Boots stomped against gravel as the platoon marched toward the training field, rifles slung, helmets strapped tight. No one spoke. Even the jokers stayed quiet. It was the kind of silence that came before a storm. I could feel it in my chest. Sergeant Hayes strutted at the front, chest puffed, like this whole exercise was his personal stage. "Eyes forward, ladies," he barked. "Today's the day I find out who's got soldier in their blood and who's just playing dress-up." His eyes landed on me, lingered long enough that everyone knew where his attention was aimed. And I think we all know who's going to crack first. A few smirks, a couple of snickers. I said nothing, just tightened my grip on the strap of my rifle and kept marching. The drill was supposed to test everything. Movement under fire, communication, unit cohesion. They set it up like a combat scenario. Smoke grenades, blank rounds cracking like real bullets, explosions rattling the ground. The second we hit the field, chaos swallowed us. Hayes barked orders so fast no one could keep up. His voice boomed through the static of radios. "Move left. No, right. Keep your heads down." It was panic disguised as command. I could see it in the others' eyes. They didn't trust his lead. We reached the midpoint of the course, and that's when the radio sputtered, static cutting through every word. Then silence. Total comms blackout. The platoon froze, caught between advancing and retreating. Without radio contact, we were blind. Hayes shouted, "Keep moving! Stay with me!" But his voice wavered, cracking in a way I hadn't heard before. For the first time, I realized something. Hayes wasn't in control. He was scared. The smoke thickened, rolling over us in waves. Suddenly, a cry ripped through the noise. Ramirez had gone down, pinned under a collapsed barrier. His leg trapped, his rifle half buried in mud. Bullets cracked overhead, blanks, but they felt real enough when you heard them snap. The squad hesitated. No one moved. Hayes screamed, "Leave him! He's done! Move forward!" The words echoed like betrayal. Leave a man. That's not what we were taught. That's not what my father would have done. Before I knew it, I was moving. Dropping my rifle, I crawled low through mud and smoke, ignoring Hayes' shouts. My hands burned as I clawed at the debris, my body straining. Ramirez groaned, blood streaking his face from where he'd hit the ground. Don't waste time on me," he muttered, voice weak. I ignored him, locked my arms under the beam and heaved. My muscles screamed, mud sucking me down, but little by little the weight shifted. I dragged him free, slinging his arm over my shoulders, and started pulling us toward cover. Hayes was livid. His voice tore through the comms. "Walker, you just doomed us all. You think this is hero hour?" He pointed for the others to keep moving, but they didn't. They looked back. They saw me dragging Ramirez, mud up to my chest, face twisted with effort, but not stopping. In that second, something shifted. The silence of hesitation cracked. A couple of them doubled back, forming a cover line while I hauled Ramirez behind a barrier. For once, I wasn't the weak link. I was leading, and they were following. But the danger wasn't over. The radio was still dead. Without it, the whole platoon would fail the drill, maybe even get chewed out by command for lack of discipline. Hayes fumbled with the set, cursing, slamming it against his helmet. I saw his hands shaking. For the first time, he looked small. I dropped Ramirez gently, checked his leg, then grabbed the busted radio. Years in my father's garage came back like muscle memory. I popped the cover, rewired connections with trembling fingers, using the knife from my pocket as a tool. Hayes sneered. "You don't know what the hell you're doing, Walker. Give it back before you break it worse." But I kept working, tuning out his voice. Sweat dripped into my eyes. My fingers slipped in mud and grease, but I pressed on. Then a crackle. A voice. The radio came alive. "Alpha Team, do you copy?" I keyed the mic. "This is Alpha Team. Copy loud and clear." Silence on the line. Then, "Acknowledged. Continue mission." The relief hit like a tidal wave. The platoon roared with adrenaline, rallying as if someone had just flipped a switch. Hayes's face was pale, lips tight. He couldn't take credit. Everyone had seen who fixed it. Everyone knew. We pushed forward, energy surging. Ramirez limped beside me, leaning heavy but refusing to sit out. The squad moved with new rhythm, covering each other, communicating with hand signals until we finished the course. When the final flare popped, signaling the end, we collapsed in a heap, mud-caked, gasping, alive. Then the real shock came. As we stood in formation, catching our breath, I noticed an officer standing at the edge of the field. Colonel Miller, silver hair, chest full of ribbons, eyes sharp as steel. He'd been watching the whole time. Hayes straightened like a statue, barking, "Platoon ready for debrief, sir." But the colonel didn't look at him. He looked at me. He walked forward, boots heavy on gravel. The air seemed to tighten with every step. "Private Walker," he said, voice steady, carrying weight. "Step forward." My heart pounded. My boots felt glued to the ground, but I forced myself ahead. Mud dripped down my uniform, sweat burning my eyes. I saluted, stiff, unsure. The colonel studied me for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he said, "Do you know who I am?" I nodded. Everyone knew Miller. His reputation was legend. "Do you know why I know your name?" That caught me off guard. I shook my head. He leaned closer, his voice low enough for only the front row to hear, but the silence was so thick the whole platoon caught it. "Your father saved my life in Afghanistan, 2008. Night raid went south. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for him." The words punched through me. For years I'd carried that medal in silence, never speaking of my father. And here was the colonel confirming it in front of everyone. My throat tightened, but I stood firm. Miller turned slowly, facing the entire platoon. His voice boomed now, sharp and final. "I watched this exercise. I saw panic. I saw hesitation. And I saw one man who did not quit, who dragged his brother out of the mud, who fixed what was broken when others froze. That's soldiering. That's leadership. Private Walker showed today what some of you still haven't learned." The platoon shifted uncomfortably. Eyes darted away. Hayes' face drained of color. He looked like a man whose power had just been ripped from him. The colonel's gaze locked on Hayes. "And you? You told them to leave a man behind." The silence was brutal. Hayes tried to speak, stammering, "Sir, I was keeping the mission moving." But Miller cut him off. "A mission without men is nothing. You don't abandon your own. Not ever." The field was dead quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. Hayes lowered his eyes, jaw tight, exposed. For once, his words failed him. Then the colonel turned back to me. "Private Walker, your father would be proud. Today you earned more than your place here. You earned respect." My chest ached. I wanted to speak, but words stuck in my throat. I only nodded, standing straighter than I ever had. Ramirez caught my eye, gave that same small nod he always did. But this time it wasn't pity. It was respect. That day everything shifted. Hayes's voice no longer carried the same weight. The platoon looked at me differently, not as the charity case, not as the weak link, but as one of their own. The humiliation, the insults, the nights of pain, they all led here, to this moment. And I'll never forget the look in Hayes's eyes when he realized the truth, that all his power, all his cruelty had just crumbled in front of everyone, and that the man he tried to break was the one who proved unbreakable. The barracks felt different that night. Usually, after a field exercise, the room buzzed with jokes, card games, boots hitting the floor as guys collapsed into bunks. Not this time. Not after what had just happened. The air was heavy, almost guilty, like nobody wanted to be the first to speak. I sat on my bunk, peeling dried mud from my boots, hands still raw from dragging Ramirez. My body ached, but it wasn't pain I noticed. It was silence. Eyes that used to look through me now flicked my way, then darted off, ashamed. The same guys who once laughed at Hayes's insults now avoided me like I was holding a mirror they couldn't face. Hayes was the only one who tried to carry on like nothing had changed. He paced the room, shoulders tight, muttering under his breath. Walker thinks he's a hero now. Just one drill. Don't get comfortable, boys. Weakness doesn't disappear in a day. But his voice didn't land the way it used to. No chuckles, no nods of agreement, just silence. He noticed too. I could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the way he gripped his clipboard like it was a weapon. At chow the next day, I carried my tray down the line. For months, that short walk had been a gauntlet. Shoves, snickers, whispered names that stuck like glue. This time, the room stayed quiet. Nobody reached out to trip me. Nobody muttered. Even the usual troublemakers kept their heads down. I sat across from Ramirez, who was limping but healing. He tore his bread in half and pushed it toward me, just like before. But this time, his eyes met mine, steady. You saved my ass out there, he said. His voice was low, but it carried weight. Don't forget that. For the first time, there was no pity in his tone, just respect. Still, Hayes wasn't finished. He cornered me outside the armory, voice sharp, eyes darting to make sure no officers were around. You think you embarrassed me out there? You think one stunt makes you something you're not? He jabbed a finger into my chest. You're still the charity case, the pity project. Don't forget who's in charge here. I held his gaze. For the first time, I didn't look away. I didn't speak either, just stared back until his hand dropped. The silence between us said everything. He couldn't rattle me anymore, and he knew it. Later that week, the platoon stood in formation on the parade ground. Colonel Miller walked the line, his shadow stretching long in the evening light. His words still echoed from the drill. You don't abandon your own, not ever. Everyone had heard it, everyone had felt it, and now, standing shoulder to shoulder, we all knew the meaning had shifted. Hayes's authority wasn't what it once was. His bark had lost its bite. Miller stopped in front of me. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I stood tall, eyes forward. He looked me over, then spoke so the whole line could hear. Private Walker, he said, yesterday you showed courage. Today you show composure. That is what this uniform demands. His eyes swept the formation, daring anyone to challenge it. No one did. Hayes stood stiff, but his face was pale. That night in the barracks, the shift became impossible to ignore. Guys who once laughed at me now asked quiet questions. How'd you fix that radio? What was it like, carrying Ramirez under fire? They weren't mocking anymore. They wanted to know. They wanted to understand. I kept my answers short. I wasn't chasing their approval. But their tone told me everything. The wall between us was crumbling. Hayes tried one last time to reassert himself. During evening drills, he barked louder than ever, pushing us through push-ups until arms gave out, runs until lungs burned. But his insults fell flat. When he called me welfare boy, no one laughed. The silence was louder than any cheer. I caught the look in his eyes, panic disguised as fury. He realized he was standing alone. The climax came 2 days later during a company inspection. Officers moved through the barracks, checking bunks, gear, and uniforms. Hayes hovered close, desperate to catch me slip. When they reached my rack, he smirked. Better make sure Walker didn't forget to tuck in his blanket like a good little factory boy. He yanked at my sheets, expecting disorder. Instead, the quarter bounced high. Perfect. The officer nodded with approval. Hayes' smirk faltered, but he tried again. Check his rifle, sir. Bet you'll find it filthy. The officer took my weapon, ran a white glove through the barrel, clean as glass. He handed it back without a word, and then the colonel appeared. He didn't look at anyone else, just me, then Hayes. I've been watching, Miller said, his voice low but sharp. Watching who builds and who tears down, who stands up and who hides behind rank. His eyes drilled into Hayes. Respect isn't taken, it's earned, and some of you, he paused, have earned none. The words landed like artillery. The platoon shifted, boots scraping as heads turned toward Hayes. He didn't move, didn't speak. His authority cracked right there, shattered in front of everyone. When inspection ended, the room buzzed quietly. Not with laughter, not with ridicule, with something heavier. Hayes slumped at his desk, no longer pacing, no longer sneering. For the first time, he looked small. Ramirez came over, slapped me lightly on the shoulder. Guess you finally shut him up, he said with a half smile. It wasn't a joke. It was acknowledgement. That night, lying on my bunk, I stared at the metal tucked under my pillow. For months, it had been my secret, my reminder of who I wanted to be. Now I realized I didn't need to hide it anymore. I'd started to earn my own way, not as my father's son, but as Private Ethan Walker. And the sweetest part? The same platoon that once mocked me now watched me differently. Not as weak, not as welfare boy, as one of them. Hayes would never admit it, but deep down, he knew the truth. The man he tried to break had become the man he could no longer control. And in the Army, that kind of shift changes everything. The barracks were quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after weeks of noise. Boots lined up sharp against the wall, bunks squared away, uniforms folded like they were cut with a blade. Guys whispered in corners, polishing gear or scribbling letters home. I sat on my bunk with that small box in my lap, the one I'd kept hidden since day one. My father's medal rested inside, tarnished, edges worn smooth. I turned it over in my hand, wondering if I'd finally started to earn the right to carry it. Ramirez slid onto the bunk across from me, his limp still noticeable, but healing fast. He glanced at the medal, then back at me. That his? He asked softly. I nodded. He carried it through 2 tours, I said. Saved Colonel Miller's life on one of them. Never made it back from the second. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. Ramirez didn't look away. He just nodded slow, then lifted his hand in a salute. Not stiff, not for show. Real, quiet, respect. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just my silent ally anymore. He was my brother. Morning formation came early. The bugle call echoed across the field, cold air biting at our faces. We stood shoulder to shoulder, rifles at our sides, waiting for roll call. Colonel Miller stepped out, eyes scanning the line. His gaze stopped on me for half a second. No speech, no grand gesture, just a firm nod. And in the Army, that nod meant everything. Hayes stood 2 rows down, shoulders slumped, jaw tight. He didn't bark anymore. He didn't smirk. He looked smaller, like the weight of his own failure had finally crushed him. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. His power was gone. After formation, the platoon drifted back toward the barracks. Ramirez walked beside me, quiet as always. Finally, he said, "Funny how it turns out. You were the one we all counted out. Now you're the one we'd follow." His words hit harder than any order, because they weren't about drills or inspections. They were about trust. That night, I tucked the medal back under my pillow, but this time it felt different. For months, it had been a reminder of a legacy I thought I could never live up to. Now it was a promise, a weight I was ready to carry, not because of who my father was, but because of who I was becoming. I whispered into the dark, "I'll earn it again, my way." And for the first time since I'd arrived, I believed it. Outside, the flag flapped hard against the night wind. Reveille would sound again in a few hours, and we'd wake to another day of sweat, drills, and discipline. But something had changed forever. Respect isn't handed down. It isn't shouted. Into you, it's earned, one act at a time in the mud, in the silence, in the moments no one else wants to face. That's the legacy I carried forward. And as I closed my eyes, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The final image still lingers in my mind. Ethan Walker standing beneath the American flag, boots planted firm, wind snapping the fabric above him. No words were spoken, but the silence around him carried more weight than any speech. Even Sergeant Hayes, the man who once tried to break him, gave a stiff nod before turning away. That single gesture said everything. It was respect, hard-earned and undeniable. Moments like that stay with you, not because of medals, not because of rank, but because of what they mean about the human spirit. Walker's journey was never about proving himself with fancy words or begging for approval. It was about showing up day after day when the world told him he didn't belong. It was about dragging a brother out of the mud, fixing what others gave up on, and standing tall even when humiliation tried to grind him down. In the end, actions spoke louder than words, just like they always do. There's a lesson in this for every one of us. Injustice and prejudice may come loud, sharp, and cruel, but dignity and resilience can outlast them. Brotherhood doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it's a nod, a piece of bread shared in silence, or a salute given when no one else is looking. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and what you endure quietly can someday echo louder than the insults meant to break you. So I'll leave you with this. Never underestimate the quiet soldier, the overlooked recruit, the one carrying weight no one else sees. Their strength often becomes the backbone of the whole unit. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button to show your support and subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful story. Until then, stay strong, stay proud, and remember, you're never standing alone.